Okay, so 3, 2, 1.
What is up, everyone? We're live on Facebook, and it's 1:30. We're consistently here every Monday. Time changes because of either guest or just because of COVID.
Or because of us.
Or because of us. But we're here, and we're excited to just bring you guys some fire. I'm really excited because I want to give people some context for this podcast, and James is here with me, and we're going to just have a really good discussion about it. And also we're going to talk about stuff that I think matters, whether it's culture, politics, things that are current, and how that actually impacts you on a day-to-day. Because I'm not big into information for the sake of information. I think we have way too much information in our world, and information alone is not going to transform you or change your life. If it did, Google would have changed your life. But more information sometimes actually causes more confusion. So it's getting the right information at the right time, and also then being able to take that information and implement it. And so I'm big into transformational information. And so hopefully this podcast will be transformational. What do you think, Mr. James Harkness?
Well, that's the plan.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
There's scriptures about like God will make the wise things foolish and the foolish things wise.
Yes,
right? And so now everybody with super intellects or, their college degrees and all this stuff that like to this day, like I don't even know besides reading, writing, and math what I use from school or regular school alone. Those, how many years do they put you in school? It's more like a daycare than it is a place to learn about real life, right? Everyone talks about, it didn't teach us about taxes. It didn't teach us how to make money. It didn't teach us about real estate. It didn't teach us how to get a mortgage. It didn't teach us anything that was of value. So you got to be careful what you look at as anything that's supposedly going to make you smarter or better, right?
Yeah. And right now in our culture today, there's a lot about, hacks. Everybody's trying to hack their brain, first of all. That's the big thing right now.
Yeah.
And I always think the best way to hack your brain is simple. It's to really, truly work hard in an area that you're incredibly passionate about. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we get right into the heart, because you're such an easy guy to talk to, but I want to give people context for why we changed the name.
Right.
And you were very unhappy with the name.
Well, I wasn't like super unhappy about it. I just, I like, as you explained it, it made a lot more sense, right?
Yeah.
I guess I wanted something more simple, something more basic, like, just quick punch. But, once people understand the name of the podcast, then I think that, and once I understood it just right now when you told me that, I like it. It makes sense for sure. Yeah.
So maybe I'll explain it because I think it's really important. We were calling it Inside Out Podcast, and it's still very much about that. But I felt it needed to have a little bit punch. Part of my DNA is a reformer. I love reforming and I love distribution. I don't like wow, there's nothing wrong with distribution.
Depends what you're distributing.
Yeah, but disruption, I love it. Innovation, those are things that really interest me. I love cultural transformation. And so I've read tons on this stuff, and I'm always very interested in it. And so one of the individuals that I love, that I often listen to and read his books, is Father Richard Rohr. He's actually he's a priest. He's of the order of Francis of Assisi. He's the guy that went around talking to animals.
No, never heard of that.
My wife likes that guy because he's all about nature and really extraordinary stuff through him. And so the Jesuit priest, that's the order of a priest that kind of follow, this guy's ethic in many ways.
He's like the leader in a sense.
So I love this guy because he's just really brilliant communicator. And so one day I was listening to a podcast, and he was being interviewed on a podcast, and in that podcast he described himself as someone who was on the edge of the inside.
Okay.
And I thought, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's exactly it. And I've always felt that in order to really truly transform culture, you have to do it from the inside out. And I think right now in culture, what we're seeing is most people on the outside throwing stones, getting mad and getting angry, trying to, in some ways, erase history as a whole. We're seeing a lot of people being retroactively erased, which is crazy that people can think they can do that. Like whatever their issues or problems were, whether it's imagine trying to cancel the very people that innovated the thing called the Constitution,
right,
which is an incredible document.
Right.
But somehow we
just hit the silence or something.
Sorry.
It's going in the microphone.
We think that we can just somehow erase these people because they are not as evolved. Well, dude,
Right.
they were around in the 1700s.
Well, and so even on that, like, so obviously the things weren't always good in place, and nobody's perfect, right?
No.
And you got to understand the context of the times too. But I heard this one guy talk about it, like, there was a big problem, and I agree, like they was it in the Constitution that like black people were 3/5 of man? Was it the Constitution that was in?
Well, originally, so they had to amend it. Yeah,
Right.
there was an amendment that
And so
they made. Yes.
so the guy's point was like he never said that was good, right? That you consider black people 3/5 of man, but it's that same country that also removed that and evolved past that, right? So that kind of shows something just in the country itself. It's like, yeah, it might have. Again, people were devolved in their minds too back then, right? And they didn't have the right understanding of certain things, and whatever the case may be. But the fact that they were able to remove that shows growth. And do you not want to, like, we don't want to highlight the growth that's not in there anymore, or do we just want to focus on that and say get rid of it all? But these are people that actually grew from that, and somebody did, at least somebody spoke up and somebody said, hey, that's not right, and they adjusted and they fixed it, right?
Yeah, and that's, I think, real true. I'm big into disruption is great. I love that word, but I'm big into transformation. And transformation is, and I always, liken it to a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. There is a process of transformation and all of us, I think, have that capacity. We start as caterpillars, and then along the way, we begin the process of transformation. And transformation, we always think of it in the sense of the moment, when that, and we're big in our culture. I think we celebrate because we watch way too much Hollywood, I think. And so we love the crescendo. We love the pinnacle when
Right.
someone reaches. But there is a process.
Right. Yeah. And in the movies, it's only like an hour and a half long. And so your mind becomes programmed to think like that, right? That you're going to see some sort of instant results, or that it's just instantly going to be like that, right? But it doesn't work like
And
that.
I think that's what's happening right now with this whole movement, is that because we live in a society, one time you call it the microwave generation, but microwave's not even fast enough anymore because everything. I was just thinking about this recently. I was doing a transaction, and my debit, the tap wasn't working.
Right.
And so here I am.
You're like, oh, I got to punch it.
I got to punch it. And I'm thinking, like, because everything is instantaneous.
Yeah,
We're used to having just, tap it and then, but we don't realize the complexity behind that. It's
Right.
just the supercomputers that are involved in making sure that those transactions, imagine all these banks, they've got these systems that are set up.
Right.
And we learned that last week from Glenn
that's
Williams.
right. I was like, I heard this before recently.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm saying is that I think our culture, because we want everything instantaneous, we also want transformation instantaneous. So what we do then is, because we're unwilling, to wait and go through the process of change,
Right.
we just erase people.
Yeah.
Much easier. It's much easier to just erase history, because it's like, well, you know what? Let's just get rid of everything. But even the bad stuff, even those monuments that
they're ripping down or whatever.
they're ripping down.
Yeah.
I say, no, don't rip down those monuments, because they're a reference point.
Right.
They allow us to remember where we came from.
Right. And so in that example, maybe some of those monuments were from people. Like, here's the thing. So I understand the stuff that's going on, but I don't have super intelligence about it all. Like, I don't know the details of the statues they're ripping down. But what I can say is that when you mention it being a reference point, it's like, if that stuff ever happens again, if that person whose statue wasn't good, but maybe they did some good things, because I'm sure they weren't 100% evil, and that's the reason why there's a statue there in the first place, right? But maybe there was some things that were wrong with them. But as a reference point, going into the future, we have something to say, let's not do that again. This is what this person did. Let's don't do that. But if it's all erased, then you have no reference point. Then how easy is it for an evil person to start doing things again and start putting things in place if you don't have any knowledge or backstory or any understanding of what's happening right then and there, right?
Well, that's the point, though. Those that don't learn from history
Right.
are bound or
again.
condemned to repeat
Yeah.
it. And the reason being is it's like, is everything about my history great? No.
Right.
I mean, oh my goodness. If
Right.
my history was just put on, on Hollywood, and everybody had the opportunity to see all the ugly parts of my life, what the heck? Like, I don't. But the point is that all the good, the bad, the all of it makes me. It's part of my history and who I am.
And if you didn't have any reference points in your own life, how easy would it be for you to fall back into the same things? Like, I'm thinking about myself, and it's like, I'm constantly going through growth stages ever since I found God. Because before I found God, it was like living the same way for so long, right? And then I find God, and then I have a contrast of good and evil, of love and hate, and it's so obvious now. And even now, as I go through certain struggles or certain like transformations in my life, I get tempted to do some things that I used to do before, but it's so like blaringly obvious that it's not right, and that it's going to lead me in the path of destruction because I have that reference point, and I knew who I was before, and I knew where it led me to, and I see now how I'm living and what kind of trajectory I'm on right now. And all those reference points in my past that I've been through, because I went through before, and because I have that history in my mind and in my heart, I don't do it again. Because I know where the end leads me to. I know where that will end up leading me to.
I love it. And part of this is this, and this is, I know some people are thinking about trauma, and I get it, because, if you've been traumatized by someone's action or an individual or an organization or institution, there is a process of healing that we all have to go through. But here's something that I'm understanding, and I think it was Robert Downey Jr. saying this to Mel Gibson. Because Robert Downey Jr., if anybody knows his history, he had a big, massive drug problem. And he literally was at the lowest point of his life where no one would hire him. And Mel Gibson was the one that came alongside of him and actually gave him a role that was originally designed for Mel.
Oh, wow.
So specifically, really helped him up when, he sheltered him, did all this stuff. And it's a beautiful thing. And there's a moment, I think it was at some awards show, when Robert Downey Jr. is there actually introducing Mel Gibson. And at that point, Mel Gibson has hit the lowest point because Mel was also going through his addiction.
Alcohol and stuff like that,
but what he did was he gave people in context of saying, you know what? Yeah, Mel has done some stupid things and has said stuff, but he's not all evil and this bad guy that everybody's making him, because look what he did for me when I was at my lowest. And he actually was the one who told me, and this is the part, he says, the only way you're going to heal is if you can learn to hug. He called it the cactus, the ugly parts of you. When you can finally hug those ugly parts of you, you're going to heal. And he goes, you know what? That happened. And he went through a healing. And now he says, funny enough, he says, and the only thing he asked him is along the way is to, help the next guy or the next gal. And he goes, he didn't know it was going to be him.
Like the same guy that helped him out.
But the point is that healing happens when we really confront the ugly parts of our history. However difficult they are. Because until we confront them, they become an issue. Even if we try to somehow, tuck a bit away, it eventually it'll come up, resurface. And so part of healing for trauma is this, and I think it was Dr. Dispenza that said it. He's a neuroscientist. He said, and I love this saying. He said,
Andrew.
He said, wisdom is emotion without the pain. So it's remembering the history, but now without the emotional pain that's attached to it. That's when you've healed. It's like when you see somebody that had done something really bad to you, but you're able to look at them and you're like, now you're able to hug them, or you're just like, or you're not affected by their presence.
And we're able to forgive them too, right? You almost like gain like an understanding of it, right? And knowing that people are in a fallen state, because like almost everybody is in a fallen state, and we've all made mistakes, and we want to point fingers at other people So I remember like I wrote this line one time: learn your wrongs before you learn your rights.
Wow.
Right. So learn your wrongs before you learn your rights. Like, don't think you're entitled to anything or whatever the case may be. When you're still sinning, when you're still doing bad to people, when you're still lying or you're still not being honest in every way possible, when you're not helping other people out and you're only focused on yourself, even if you're not doing any of that stuff, but you're only focused on yourself, that's selfish. And you're not helping anybody. So what do you expect for other people to do for you, right? Like it was Gandhi, I think, be the change you want to be in the world, right?
Or Mother Teresa, or any of these guys.
Whatever.
Doesn't matter. We just give them names.
It's really important to just, I mean, you're also, a lot of people like are letting other people affect them, right? And so that just shows a weakness on your behalf. When you, like, we all have opportunities to crush life, no matter what obstacles are in our way, whether they are from what people call systemic racism, what people call, growing up with a single mom, you know what I mean? Like, whatever the case may be, we all have obstacles and hurdles, but there is a way. No matter how hard that obstacle is, there actually is a way to push through it and become successful and go beyond it. But are you going to sit behind the obstacle and scream and cry at it, or are you going to bust through it?
That's it.
That's the choice.
Straight up.
Right?
And the way is always through the obstacle.
Right.
And I think this is where all of us, and that's something I'm learning every day, is that when I see the obstacles in my life, instead of, we all want God to come in and remove our obstacles. I think I preached a sermon years ago and I said, God doesn't necessarily come in and just pluck us out of our problems.
Right.
What he does is instead of taking, he gives his grace. Right. He empowers us because he believes in us. It's like, as a parent, just this yesterday, we were going for a big hike, and it's crazy. This really cool. There's a bike path there, and it's like, it's for mountain, bikes and stuff like that. Yeah. So my little daughter, who's 5 years old, is there trying to follow my little two crazy, older kids. They're just flying through the stuff.
Right. Were you guys biking?
Well, I was walking. Yeah, the three of them were biking. Right. But there's these little bumps and hills that really scared her, and every part of me just wanted to go in there and help her do it. But what I was doing was I was saying to her, you can do it, baby. You can do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're a warrior. You're Xena, and so, and all because I want to instill confidence in her that she has the potential inside of her. Right. But so part of, I think, all of us is that when we're confronted with a situation that seems bigger than ourselves, we all cower. We all want to hide. We all want to run away, and we all want somebody to come and just save us. But I think the best thing to do often is this idea of just empowering and encouraging somebody. And so obstacles are necessary, for growth. And we know this when it comes to exercise and all this stuff. Unless there's resistance, you cannot grow. Yeah. And I think in our culture right now, the mistake that we're making is we're coddling people. We're trying to remove as many obstacles as possible. And I'm not saying, to be masochist and just there's been historically some horrendous obstacles that have been put in front of, whether it's the indigenous people or black people, and whatever. Even you as an individual, you've had some really big obstacles just because of your the upbringing and the poverty and all these things. And so part of our job is to go around and to remove those barriers. But I find this is the conversation I like to have, is that there's two types of barriers. Physical barriers that we can all see, and everybody loves to do that, and the social justice component of it, which is important. But there's also the mental, emotional barriers. When I was in women's studies, I was in women's studies at Carleton University.
So, you chose it, or was it
I chose it, man? No, I chose it. I just at the time that's what I was like, And one of the things I learned was, and I never forgot this, I think that's the only thing I remember from my women's studies course, other than there's I think there's 400 students in there. I think 20 of us was guys. Wow. And they weren't all angry feminists and whatever. They were actually really cool. And but one of the concepts that I learned there was the bird cage syndrome. And I've written about this concept. And this idea is that if a bird has been caged for a long time, you can remove the cages and it won't fly away.
It was the same thing with the elephant. The thing about the elephant, you could tie an elephant to like the tiniest tree, and it doesn't go anywhere because it feels like it's tied up. Yeah.
But it's conditioning. So the biggest battle is always the conditioning.
Yeah.
So this is why prisoners, like people always talk about, like why so many prisoners, reoffend.
Yeah.
It's because the conditioning. Once you've been conditioned, the challenge. This is why the Israelites couldn't cross. They spent 40 years because they had the mental slavery, the mindset of slavery.
That's it. It's the mindset.
And mindset.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading that today in Joshua 5, and it's interesting because it says in that passage, like literally God had to wait till the old generation had to die because that generation that had the Egypt mindset, they still couldn't shake it.
Right.
They couldn't shake it. They still had the slavery mindset. And so if they were to go into the promised land, they were just going to make it another Egypt.
Right.
And so this is
100%.
So there's two challenges that we're confronted with. There's the physical, which we all see, and I think this is where culture is at right now. Everybody's battling the physical battle,
right.
And I think rightfully so. Yes, we need to remove obstacles for people, so that not necessarily remove them in the sense that just because they're black or they're female, whatever, that they get a position. I think it should be on merit. That meaning that the person has to have the skill set. I don't want somebody to put me in a position just because of my blackness.
Right.
Because to me,
affirmative action.
That's affirmative action. I think to some extent, all it says is that I'm not capable, but I think I need to have equal opportunity. I need to have the same exact opportunity as another person.
Right.
And I know we can get really deep into it in the sense that, what does that look like? Because just like if someone just came out of prison,
right.
Does he really have?
I think prison would give you less equal opportunity than anything else in the world. Because I'll ask you, you're a black man. Do you feel like you don't have equal opportunity as me?
No. Not at all. Not a day in my life have I ever felt like that.
So is it more of a mental thing than it is a physical thing?
100%. I think the conversation that we don't want to have, which is the harder conversation to have, is the fact that and this is the thing, okay? Your excuses, and I heard this recently, it was this African speaker, I can't remember him, but if you want to check him out, he's brilliant, and maybe we can put him in the liner in the notes.
Sure. Yeah.
But he said about excuses are real. Like you can't just deny, like sometimes people are like, deny your excuses. That's madness. You can't deny the reality of your life.
Right.
But the question is but now what? What are you going to do? Because those excuses are not going to leave unless you do something about them. Right. So I recognize that the barriers that exist, whether it was in high school, I saw them all. I remember it was in grade 9 or 10, my vice principal, I still remember his name, crazy, and I won't say his name. But I remember he looked at me and I was underperforming. But what he didn't realize was I just recently learned the language. Like we immigrated to Canada when I was 10, and I didn't necessarily, I was just trying to catch up. Here I was in grade 6 learning a new language, learning new culture. It was really challenging. So I still wasn't great in English. I was horrible. Like I couldn't write reports. I couldn't do it. But he didn't look at my challenges from a vantage point of saying, you know what, instead of helping me out, do you know what he said to me? He goes, you just need to figure out, like maybe do carpentry or like, work with your hands kind of thing, because you're just never going to mount. He didn't realize what was inside of me.
Right.
He didn't realize I was horrible with my hands. I can't do anything. I have to call on my wife to fix stuff. That's just the reality. Like, I'm straight up metrosexual, whatever you want. Like, I'm straight up not really good, like on my wife's side of the family, like they're incredible with their hands. I'm not. I try to pretend sometimes. Like yesterday, I felt really good because my daughter's chain came off.
Right. And usually, you can put it back on.
I put it on, dude, like in 20 seconds.
Oh, yeah?
And there was a gentleman and his wife walking by and they saw me.
Yeah.
Dude, I felt so proud. I was just like, yeah, check me out. Because those are things my wife is always laughing at me because I can't do like things that seem
anything
so
that breaks in the house or
I just
whatever,
don't.
right?
I'm not great, but with my mind, that's what I'm brilliant at. That's just been my gifting. Yeah. But imagine for somebody to, pigeonhole you based on your race.
Right.
That you're not going to amount to anything. So you just figure out and so to me, those barriers are real. But this is the thing. I was raised in a home where my parents never, ever made that an excuse.
And look at you now, right?
We never addressed, they never addressed me according to my color.
Right.
They never, like, the concept of black. I used to remember for the longest time, my mom would say to me things like you're not black. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, look at me. Because for her, she understood, having come from...
So she was trying to implement that in you, like, for a reason. She was saying that
because she knew that race was a social construct.
Right.
Like, that the concept, like, where I came from, everybody is the same color, different hues and stuff like that. So I wasn't conditioned according to maybe status and, wealth and all that stuff. Yeah, that was a big deal in Africa, especially. But race wasn't something that, so for me, even though I listened to the rappers and try to somehow identify with that, it wasn't necessarily my history.
Right. Whereas I identify with that more.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? As a white person, I was identifying with all these black rappers. I mean, Eminem, obviously, of course, to some degree, but I listened to all black rappers and I identify with them because of how I live, with the single mom who, thank God she's completely reformed, but who was an alcoholic. My dad was never around. I got in fist fights with my dad when I did see him, like the odd time that I seen him. And growing up with just my mom's income, basically, besides, if there was a guy that came, was my stepdad for a bit, whatever, but still no love in the house, no father figure in the house,
wow.
Drug dealing at 12 years old, you know what I mean? Like all these kind of things. And I related to these rappers, but it comes down to that, like a mental state, like we just talked about. Like your mom is telling you you're not black, so basically don't identify with your skin color. It's not that you're not black per se, but it's she just didn't want you to identify with your race, right?
That's it.
And I actually got like the reverse racist card because I was dressing up like rappers and stuff, and people would tell me, "Oh, you think you're black? You think you're black?" So I almost got it in reverse.
Yeah.
But what I see as the biggest mental block and the biggest barrier in my life, and honestly in probably everybody's life, is the societal constructs of how we're supposed to live and the knowledge that's passed down to us from our parents.
Yeah.
And the schooling systems obviously have failed almost all of us. If you look at my generation, like people are just in super debt. They can't even get jobs with the degrees that they've earned and paid for and all this stuff. And they're just in massive debt. And most of them are still living at home, right? Like 20, 30 to 40, most of them are still living at home. You know what I mean? And it's because we weren't taught the things like save your money, invest your money, buy land, build your own house, or get a mortgage. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even think mortgages is the best thing to do if we were taught better in the first place. Like if you bought a piece of land and then you built even just a shack on it, you're better than you are having a mortgage because you have no debt, you have land, and you could build on top of your house from that point. But it was the mentality and it was the mindset that says, my mom used to always tell me, get a job all the time. But I started selling drugs at 12 years old. So she couldn't put that in my head anymore because I understood buying and selling and not being a slave and having my own time. Whether or not drug dealing is good or bad, we obviously know the situation in that. But it taught me I can buy something and I can sell it to people and I can make profit off of that. And I don't have to kill myself washing dishes. I don't have to kill myself, cooking for 150 people a night and then, cleaning up a whole kitchen or whatever the case is, or working construction. And this is like, we're talking 8-9 hours of your day, right? So there's 24 hours in a day. We sleep generally about 8 hours. So that leaves us with 16 hours. Then you do 8 hours of your work, but probably about half an hour to an hour of travel time there and back. So we're up to 9-10 hours of your day. You got 6 hours left. 6 hours of your day is all you own. And more of that time is going to school or to work. And from the beginning, I thought that was something wrong with that because I think of me selling drugs and knowing that I could make money doing this. Why would I sell my soul basically or my whole life away and work in another kind of environment that's not going to appreciate me, that's not going to pay me well, and then not have any motivation to do anything afterwards anyways, right?
Amazing.
But on top of that, it's there was a point I was just thinking about making, but it's slipping me. But it's like because even in that job, there's no security in that job. Like, what if you do something that the boss doesn't like? Or what if the boss just doesn't like you one day and they've been keeping track of things that they could fire you for, and then one day they just fire you and then you're out of a job. Then you're looking for another job, right? What if that business closed down? Well, then you're looking for another job, and it's a constant circle. So there really is, it's a false sense of security, but you're also giving away like your whole life to do that pretty much. You don't have any time left. Maybe you get your 1 or 2 weeks of vacation, right? A year, and then you're back to the grind, back to the same thing, doing something that you most likely don't enjoy. That's another thing too, because it's not a bad thing to work that many hours in a day, I don't think, but are you, like, how do you, again, I think of Jolene just pops in my head. Is it good money or is it money you hate, right? Like, do you hate earning that money? Like, yeah, we all like to make money, but do you really like making the money that you're making, right? And so not only is it your life, your time going away, but you're making money that you don't even want to be making at that time. And then you're not wise with your money. You're either trying to numb it with drugs or alcohol or going out or sleeping with women or whatever the case may be. But you're looking for some fulfillment in life because you followed the patterns of everybody else around you. Right?
That's so powerful, dude. That's just boom. That's a bomb. And the whole time I'm listening to you, what I'm thinking about is knowledge is the precursor to transformation. And so it's these categories, whatever it is, the isms, you know, racism, all these things, they're all barriers. They're real barriers. They're barriers. We all have barriers that we're constantly having to overcome.
Right.
But for me, the biggest barrier that I have to learn to overcome every day is me, Joe.
Right.
Because this is what you're talking about. It's all the conditioning.
Yeah.
So when you've been conditioned to think in a certain way, it's very difficult to even see the opportunities that are presented in front of you because you don't see them as such.
Yeah.
Because your conditioning doesn't allow for it.
Right.
You're not willing to take certain types of risks because much of your life maybe is based on fear. You know, most of the people, and this is interesting enough, like this, I learned this actually when I was doing a lot of work with the homeless and stuff like that. Right. And I was just like, man, and I saw this, it was really weird. It was just like, there was some incredible people that would share like their last piece of bread.
Right. Yeah.
And even though they were poor, they acted rich.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from them that their poverty didn't in any way destroy their identity and their ability to give.
Right.
Even though they're dealing with mental health or addiction and all that stuff, which is awesome. Yeah. But then there's another group of people, they're as greedy as they come. Right. They used people, they purposely would like, you know, play on your kindness and generosity. Yeah. You get to the point where you can actually become incredibly cynical because you get burnt a few times.
Right, exactly.
So, and I got burnt a few times and I learned that. Yeah. But the point that I'm trying to say is that it don't matter where you are on the status ladder. If your mindset is different and you're not thinking like everyone else, you already won the game to some extent.
Exactly, yeah.
And then should you experience the external manifestation of what you believe on the inside? Yeah.
Right.
And I believe ultimately, I don't know the timeline, how it works out. Right. I wish I did. Everybody thinks they do. Yeah, they're all on YouTube telling you 2 steps, 3 steps to. I think there's a process at the right time eventually, but I've never heard anybody who's done work on the inside go, man, that sucked. Oh, what a waste of time.
Even if they didn't get what they had hoped for or what they planned for, because you start to realize that God works all things together for good, right?
Exactly.
And it's, you know, people say law of attraction, but I remember writing a post before. I forget what my whole point about the law of attraction was, but I mess with it to some extent, but then it goes deeper, right? Where Jesus said, pray as if you've already received it. And so it's a matter of belief. So, and Jesus used to always say, do you believe? To people, when people will go up to Jesus and they would ask him to heal. And Jesus, can you heal me? Or can you heal my son or their daughter or whatever? The soldier came up to him. And he would ask them, do you believe? And they said, yes, Jesus, I believe. And he said, your faith has made you well, right?
Yes.
So what's inside of us is what's limiting us, right? So if you have that belief that says, like, I'll never settle for just some regular, and you know what, here's the thing. I'll say this, I'll never settle for a regular life where I have to work a regular job, live in a regular place, and, you know, my kids have the regular stuff too. That's not me. I'll struggle if I have to. But all in that, it's not, so I won't settle for just some regular stuff, but I'm at peace if I'm at regular stuff as well. Like, I don't mind being there. It's okay because I know where I'm going. I truly know where I'm going.
Yeah.
So I can find peace. And even if I never get there, that's fine because I trust God with my life.
Yeah.
And he brings me peace in the moment. He brings me, no matter what's going on around me, whether I'm splitting up with the mother of my children, my parents aren't seeing eye to eye with me, work slow at one point, maybe I just lost a big gig. Well, I don't care. You know what I mean? Because I just I just talked about, I just had this house where this guy tried to scam me, right? I was looking for a rental house and this guy tried to scam me out of the first payment month. And I was really hopeful for the house because it seemed perfect for me and my kids. It was just ideal. And the rent was a good price. Everything was great. And then boom, I get that one fishy email and I'm like, okay, this is a scam. And disappointment hits at first.
Yeah.
But I even feel wrong for letting that disappointment hit me. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, do I trust God or do I not trust God? It's one or the other. It's not middle ground. It's not sometimes I'll trust him. So if I trust him, then why am I disappointed when something doesn't go as expected, right? And so I just let it go. I said, whatever. But that I still want to get past where I have that initial emotional discharge, you could call it, where these emotions just rise up and I'm disappointed. And then now I'm not the father I want to be for my kids that I truly am most of the time, right? I let something get in the way of me being a father of my children. So it's like you have to have your goals set, you have to have your morals set, and you have to just be decided on what it is. And God willing, it's going to happen eventually. And for the most case, it usually does. Now I won't say I'll say 99% of the time it does. But if that 1% happens to you, then what are you going to do about it? You got to still remain with your goals and still remain with your moral character so that when the opportunity does present itself, you're not sleeping on it, or it's not just going right past you, or you going right past it, right?
Yeah, and there's a story that I'm thinking of right now. It's the Nehemiah. There's a book in this guy's, working for the king in Persia, and he's the cupbearer. He just basically what he's doing is he's tested. Okay. He's got to drink the wine before the king does because
it might be poisonous.
Might poison. What a job! Imagine that's your job. You're like, this could be your last one.
I got you.
I got you. So this is the job he has, but then he also has this, and this is, I think, I will talk a little bit about calling and stuff because often people talk about this and they're like, well, what is this? Kanye was on Joe Rogan talking about, he's called by God to be the leader of the free world.
Right.
So we'll talk a little bit about that a little later.
Yeah.
But the point is that Nehemiah is this guy who's just a ordinary dude who is there, putting his life at risk every day for this king.
Right.
But then he has this thing on him, this calling to rebuild the walls, because the walls of his nation, Israel at the time, they were decimated. So a nation without a wall is basically non-existent. So he has this.
Sounds like the USA.
Yeah, no, he's got this mandate now.
Building the wall.
Yeah, because walls. Anyways, I won't go into deep into what the meaning of walls and stuff like that. But the point is that he has this thing, and so now he's got a purpose, but the purpose sounds totally and absolutely like ludicrous in light of what? So no one is like, yeah, right. Who do you think you are? You're going to go build the walls. These walls have been, decimated. We're like, exiled. But he really, really listens to God. And so he just shows up every day. Mm-hmm. And he's just doing it. Yeah. Even when people are making fun of him, people are trying to distract him. Like one of the things about him is he just stays on the job. He stays on the calling. And I think often, and this happens to all of us, somewhere along the way, when you're called to do something that is that could be extraordinary, that's different, you're going to face resistance.
100%. Yeah.
And you're going to have these moments where things are going to fall apart and not work.
Big time. Yeah.
That's when really whether or not, you actually have faith, because now you either gonna just give up or you're gonna keep believing. And so this is the thing though, and this is the part that I've been thinking about. We always think that the reward is, at the end, and this is against movies, movies always tell us like in the end, he wins the game, catches the last, gets the girl. That's the typical. But often life doesn't work that way.
Right.
Often you actually may not necessarily even see, like Dr. Martin Luther King was killed prematurely before he had a dream.
Yeah.
He saw the dream, but he never fully walked in the dream.
Right.
For him to see it all, to see that finally, Black people being emancipated in a real sense. He had experience of it.
Yeah.
But for him to come now to see, you know, Kanye West being worth $5.2 billion.
Didn't Kanye say something about that one time about Martin Luther King?
I don't know. But the point is that maybe the whole dream hasn't been realized, but man, a large percentage of that dream has been realized. Right. But this is the thing. Is he a failure? Incredible success. Right. Because, and this is what I'm learning, is that life is always never about the outcome.
Right.
We're about the outcome. It's like always, we live in an outcome economy, you know, and so if you don't get the certain outcome, then you fail and whatever. Right. But sometimes you can win and still lose.
Yeah.
You can still get the gold medal.
Well, that's what I was just about to say that, like, you know, like the movie thing you're just describing, you know, people have these goals that they want to achieve, like either get the girl or, you know, get the job, or they win the game, like you said, whatever. And then what?
Exactly.
That's the thing.
Then what?
And then what? So what if you actually did attain that? And then what? You think that's not how we work. That's not how we're wired to say, okay, I got it. I'm good now. I can just sit here for the rest of my life. No, we want to create and we want to see end results of things, but it's a mind state change that puts you in the moment right then and there and enjoys everything that's happening at that time.
It's
not waiting for the goal to be happy. It's being happy on the way to the goal and continuing that.
Yeah. And that is where the present moment that we have is the only thing that we are all promised. Right. And so often what we're doing is we're like these crazy gamblers, you know, we gamble our moment, what we have for a future that's not promised. And most of marketing is based on that. Most of marketing is always saying, you know, get you really dissatisfied with your present.
Right.
So that you can get really agitated and worked up. Yeah. And then you're like, yes. But the thing is, sometimes you got to ask yourself the question. And this is what, like, there's another story, Esau, where he sells his inheritance. He's the older brother. Yeah, his birthright.
I think birthright
inheritance, the whole thing, for a bowl of soap, lentil soup. Yeah. Because he's famished temporarily.
Right.
So this is, I think, that moment, in that moment, he didn't value it. Actually says he profaned, like we always use the word profane in the sense of, you know, like cussing, whatever, but profane is actually to devalue. He didn't honor it. Right. He just kind of looked at it and says, what big deal. And often we devalue the talents and the gifts and the history and all the stuff that's wrapped in us. Right. And we're always looking outside of ourselves. We're always looking for somebody to save us and rescue us. Right. And I think if we just simply looked at all the resources that surround it, I always use it in the term of underutilized assets. Right. How many of us are like these parked cars? Like, you know, that's what Uber realized. Uber is like, you know what, there's a bunch of cars that are sitting in people's parking lots that are not being utilized. And so they learned how to utilize them.
Because they didn't need to provide any sort of vehicle. Like, there's something about Uber, like people call it, like it's the company that has nothing. Or, do you know what I'm talking about?
The biggest transportation company in the world without cars.
That's it. Right. Yeah.
Why is that? Because they understood that there was, and much of life is that way, is that there's all of us, no one in this world, no matter how difficult your situation, all of us have an asset. Yeah. We're all born into this world with the ability to create. Yeah. Our creative powers are so incredible, but we don't realize that. That's why I'm a big proponent of this idea that you can't really change culture. Like people are running around trying to change culture. Right. I think you can create new culture.
Yeah, so that's funny because I've always said that I said the same thing before. It was like basically the whole thing about the government and how the way the world is structured right now. I don't agree with almost all, we can get into details, but like there's a huge chunk of it that I don't agree with, that I don't follow suit in. And so instead of trying to fight that and change that, even my dad, I was actually just talking with my dad like maybe a month ago or something like that. And he had this idea, and he actually brought you up too. It's funny because he thinks that maybe you could have some part in this, but he wanted to create some sort of like Christian political party because there's nobody really representing Christianity in a political party sense, right? And while I was like, yeah, you know what, that's a good point. And there's some Christians that have big money, so we could actually get, you know, people to donate to the campaigns and maybe make an impact, right? Because it's not like we just have no resources to do it with. But I'm like, why bother? You know what I mean? I'm like, why don't we just, like, what do you want to do? What is it that you want to change? Just go do it.
Well, I think, you know what? This is the thing. Anything that has Christian in front of it or black in front of it or whatever's in front of it, I don't want to be part of.
Right.
Because here's the thing, okay? And people might hate on me on this, but I'll explain this, is that I don't want to be limited because I'm more than just one thing. And I think sometimes what we do is when we label stuff, C.S. Lewis said something really beautiful. He said, the world doesn't want to see another Christian writer. The world wants to see another great writer who happens to be Christian.
Right.
I happen to be Christian. I happen to be black. I happen to be all that. But I don't necessarily, even my business or what I do, I allow who I am and my faith and all that to be expressed, and it expresses everything because that's what I am and what I believe. Yeah. But it's also not just one part of me. And I think in our culture, the problem that we're having right now, why we have so much polarization and division, is because of that thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's the ego thing too. So when you feel like what I noticed with a lot of Christians people, like just the way my dad was speaking about it, and I don't think my dad was in like the egotistical sense of it, of like wrapped up in his identity as a Christian, even though I think my parents can do that sometimes. But again, like they really do love God and they do a lot of good, and I've seen it, right? But there's this identity that people have to like push Jesus on everybody, and they have to be known as the Christian and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, just let your actions speak. Like if you are really based in Christianity and you really love Jesus and you really love God and you're really living for them, people will notice that difference. And so, if you want to make a school, you can make a school. And you know what? I told him, I said, we could shoot videos, we can run ads, we can ask people to donate, Christians to donate, and we can build our own schools. We don't need to be part of a system that like doesn't want any part of us.
Well, and the thing is this, think of it this way. Here's my thinking. Jesus comes to remove a barrier.
Yeah.
Okay. God, that's his thing. So to be
big time. Yeah.
So we can be reconciled with God and reconciled to each other. That's the ultimate gospel message, is to remove barriers. What I see within even the Christian culture is people putting more barriers. So that's religion. Religion always puts a barrier because it puts a have to.
Yeah.
You have to belong to this club. You have to do this prayer. You got to do this and this and that. Most of our world operates based on religion. Even most of the personal development world is all religion, because it just tells you.
Religion,
it's because if you do A, B, and C, you get this.
Right.
I'm more of the mindset of saying, look, in my family, there is no barriers. Like my children are my children.
Yeah.
We treat them all amazingly the same. They have access to everything around the house. And so what I see, even the political system, do we need politics so that we can govern and all that stuff? The reality of it all. But do I care about bringing another Christian party because it professes to be more moral than? No, it just it's not going to solve the big problems in our culture anyways. I think like Jesus, I love Jesus, that he's like, they're like, should I pay taxes? And he's like, well, whose face is on that coin? He says Caesar. And he says, well, give to Caesar unto Caesar. He was separating because he said, my kingdom is not of this world. So he's not here to come and overthrow, at the time, the Roman Republic.
And sorry to cut you, but this is what I mean about a mind state, right? It's not about overthrowing it, but it's about separating yourself from it, right? So like Jesus wasn't for government. He was like, you could see but he just lived his life and let them do them, and he did him, right? And that was what he was based upon. And the whole thing. Anyways,
Don't worry. I like the subject matter, politics.
But so, like, because I don't think we need political parties and stuff like that. Here's the thing: I don't have a historical reference point to say what's it like without it. And so that's where, like, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that it's not good right now. Like, the way how much people are taxed. Everyone always says that it's. So it's funny because if you get in a discussion with people about tax, you'll have most people, like 95% of the people, will say that they're being robbed, that their paychecks are being robbed, But then if you tell them not to pay taxes, or that if taxation is theft, which is like a big meme that was going around, they'll say, well, how do you think we got roads? The same people that admit that they're getting robbed on their paychecks will justify the taxes afterwards. So they're wishy-washy in it, right? Do you need taxes to build roads, or are they actually robbing you for your tax money, right?
I think this is what I look at it, and this is how I've always looked at life. I prefer not to speak on the extremes in the sense of like, words like, government's trying to rob me or anything like that. I think this is what happens is that, and this is the government bureaucracy of government. Yeah. So taxation, for example, is introduced at a time of war and a time of need.
Right.
And then government says, you know what, we kind of like the revenue.
Because they were supposed to take it off. It wasn't supposed to be
for me, so if you ask me philosophically, I believe in small government.
Yeah, small government.
So what I mean in that is that that we as individuals, if we're always looking to the government to solve all our problems, then eventually what happens is we just lose more and more of our rights. And the government's like, we'll happily consolidate power. And what happens historically is that when governments get too big, they become corrupt and ultimately the thing falls apart. Yeah. So, the Americans and Canadians, democracy and all, there's all sorts of checks, balances to make sure that doesn't happen. But in our culture right now, even with COVID,
feels like it's on the way.
What's happening is that governments are taking more and more of our civil liberties. We're losing more and more of our rights. And it's always a good reason for it.
Yeah.
There's always
quote unquote good reason.
Yeah. Right? So whatever. What I mean is there's a pandemic and so forth, so on. So we as a people, and this is the challenge of it all. So I always blame it on the people. So people can come around and say, oh, governments are made of people. Yeah. All the people that are governing us at one point, they're either related to us, they're part of families. They just what happens
somewhere along the line.
But this is the thing, it's the systems that need to be overthrown.
Right.
I believe Justin Trudeau, all these guys, they get in, they're well-meaning, but then once they get into the system is so, first of all, I talk to some people who are in government. Right. And most people say like, oh, it's so easy to be in government. And I'm like, dude, you wouldn't believe how difficult and challenging it is.
Right.
The red tapes, the bureaucracy,
you can't do anything.
It's incredibly difficult.
Because you think that the prime minister might be the head of the country, but there's people all around him that are telling him what to do and how to do things.
Well, it's the bureaucracy. Yeah. Because each ministry or each organization, entity, whatever you might want to call it, within government, it's also self-serving.
Right.
So for a lot of people, you come along and you say, well, let's remove this government program.
Right.
Well, guess what? It holds a lot of people that will lose their jobs.
Right.
It's so part of it is we have to also understand that we've gotten to a place where as a society, the systems that we've built in no longer really serving us.
Right.
And so then when those systems are no longer serving the good of all people, we need to look at it. But here's the question then, and this is where even the renaming of the podcast comes into it. Right. How does change happen?
Right.
So for me, I believe change happens from the inside out.
Right.
So for me to stand on the outside and throw rocks at the government and say, forcibly, and this is what happens in a lot of countries in our world. All you have is basically one coup after another coup, and it just perpetually cycles. Yeah. But the thing is that most of us need to get more educated, more involved, and understand. So I want to give this definition of the edge of the inside from the Jesuit priest that I talked about, Father Richard Rohr, because this will give it context and kind of put it all together. Right. So here's what he says, and this is, I believe, what this podcast is going to be, and I hope it's we all have vision. Everything starts small in a seed form, but my hope is that this would be a prophetic voice, that this would be a place where we can talk about things without ill intent, without anger, without malice, but for the sake of building things, not to destroy things. I'm not, I don't want to destroy anything. What I want to do is I want to build things, because I think that's more, it's more constructive. Yeah. It's more helping us. In the process, those things that no longer serve us will fall apart.
That's it. They'll fall apart on their own. That was like, I didn't make that point earlier, but there was a point that I was saying, here's the government over here, and here's what you want to do. Right? You don't need to be in here and change this stuff. You just got to start building something over here. And people that are in here are going to say, hey, that looks good. And they're going to come over here. And then this will just dwindle away on its own, Do
you know the law of diffusion?
No.
It's a concept of transformation, how it happens. You think about a curve, like it starts here, goes. Simon Sinek really talks about that.
Okay.
And the concept is often everybody wants transformation, but most people are in the middle. That's for everybody. And they're fairly passive, and they don't really, they just
that's another problem
laissez-faire.
too, is how people are just complacent. And some people just want to be spoon fed. They just want to go to work simple, come home, do nothing. They don't want any risk. They don't want any responsibility. They don't want any of that stuff.
But that's most people.
But then things crash down on them.
Well,
It
yeah.
always happens anyways.
But if you really want to transform, because think of it, so it starts like a little peak and then goes down.
Right.
So these people in the middle, passive, kind of like whatever.
Yeah.
These people on the, like that small percentage, I think it's 15%, whatever. Doesn't matter what you tell them, they don't care. They don't want to change. They're like whatever. They're not even listening to you. But they're early adopters. That first group. That's the people you get. Those are the people that Simon Sinek says that line up for the release of the iPhone or Star Wars or anything. These are people who are early adopters, even though they know this phone's going to be available like next week, for like without having to line up.
Yeah.
They so are into the technology, and they are the brand ambassadors.
Okay.
They're the people who buy in early. And his thing is, which is so brilliant, he said, you get that group of people.
Yeah.
You get them so excited that they then will become your brand ambassadors.
Right.
They'll go in there and tell everybody. Jesus did that. Jesus went after the 12,
Right.
the fishermen, the people.
And what he said was, let's go. And if you're not going to come, then don't worry about it. Like, so that's how you knew if you were diehard or not, right? Like if you're just drop everything and follow me or not, right?
Yeah, he pulled the people that were already interested.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, what happens then is you end up impacting that bigger pie. But often what we're doing is we're going after these big, massive,
right?
And even like the Innovator's Dilemma, this is all about disruption. He talks about that. Disruption always comes from the bottom up. Blockbuster, we talked about this last week or was week before. It didn't realize that Netflix, this little guy who's like mailing, like he was mailing DVDs to people.
Right.
They didn't think of him as a threat.
Is that how it started, or was it those little? Do you remember those little
kiosks? No.
That wasn't Netflix.
No, it was Netflix.
Okay.
There was a bunch of other ones, that just died. But Netflix was simply this little guy that kept innovating over and over again, all the way up.
Right.
So what he's saying is that the innovator's dilemma is that once you get too big, so government, church, religion, whatever you get, they become these big, massive, monolithic things. At that point, they're not even interested in changing. So the only thing that changes them, the only thing that changes them is disruption. So the early Catholic Church, like the reformer, that's Luther, he's inside is this guy.
Yeah.
People think he's mad and insane. He starts reading the scriptures and he's like, no, I don't see what they're talking about. And so he writes his 93 thesis, whatever, puts it on. No one thought that anything would happen.
Did he?
I don't think he did. But guess what?
Just being himself.
Just being himself, but the timing was perfect because the printing press was just being invented at that point, and this thing went haywire. And that was the first viral moment, by the way, in history. Before there was ever, it went viral.
Changed Christianity.
Changed Christianity. But so the point is that everything that really truly is transformative starts from the bottom up.
Right.
And so my thinking.
When you say bottom up, what do you mean exactly by bottom?
From the little guy. So
okay,
it's so people.
Right. It's not like the corporation that's already in place or whatever like that, right? So it reminds me of Andrew, the guy where we were doing the podcast before.
Yeah.
In their office, and he is the same thing. So he worked in the automotive industry for since he was young, and. I remember the term just prehistoric and dinosaur ways of doing things, but he's I don't know if he's a millennial. I guess he's probably a millennial. He's only 3 years older than me, so I think he's 33. But he was they developed this app. He thinks about the old way of doing cars, and literally he'll go into the description, he'll place it out and say people go into the automotive place, they check out the car, they test drive it, they do all this stuff, and then they sit down to see if they can get approved for the car. And a lot of people don't get approved. And he's like, that's so backwards. Why would we do it like that? And this is how it's just been done for so long. And so they developed an app where you can literally go and get your credit score, see what cars you're approved for on that dealership before anything. And it's like, okay, so this is what I'm approved for. Let me go check it out. Let me see if that's what I want. And if not, I'll build my stuff up, whatever the case is. But it's he's completely flipping the script on how things have been done the entire time. And he's just this one little guy. I grew up with his younger brother, my best friend, and it's just so funny to see. And disruptive, right? That's what it is. It's disruptive. And all you need to do is get a couple people on board to start with, which are the innovators, I think, like we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the norm, because then those people that are in the middle, they're like, so the middle people are the ones that are buying the cars, for example, and he's the disruptor, and the couple dealerships that are getting the app at first. Well, these people go and they try that and they say, I really, because they're willing to move, right? Not like the 15% that are down here, but they try it and they say, this is amazing. I can't believe we ever did it any other way. And then guess what? They become the ambassadors for your company and for your products, because they're going to their friends and family. Hey, don't worry about that. Come check this out. And then it just blows up at that point.
That's exactly
right?
it. And I think in hip hop, even, you know, music started in underground. You know, that was it. It's underground.
Fight the power.
Fight the power. And then and that's where it gets the street cred. And that's hip hop. The reason why it became so mainstream. It took a long time before, like, I mean, in the early 80s, like no one was really listening to hip hop. But once the music starts to, there's a process in how cultural transformation happens.
Well, can I just say this real quick? Because it's funny, because how we're just talking about how, so it starts off at that, but then it gets too much power. And now look at how corrupt it has become, right? So it went from, you know, like from fight the power. That's what it started from, for the people in the hood, basically, to become a voice and to say, like, to use something to speak up against what was going on, right? And then it becomes corrupt. Like, I would say, like, Tupac and Biggie were the middle ground. Like,
they still were hard,
because
they
were definitely still street, but they had some good messages. Like, just Changes from Tupac comes to mind, right? The song Changes, right? You gotta
incredible.
make a change. But then he has all this other bad stuff in it, right? So there's Changes, and there's, like, a song like They Don't Give Up About Us. That's another one, right? I don't even remember how, like, good or bad that song was, but it's a message, and it's saying that, you know, the systems that are in place right now don't care about us, right? But it was like the middle ground, because it wasn't all positive. There's a lot of gangbanging and thug stuff in there, right? And then it gets a little bit bigger. It gets a little bit more power. Now hip hop is one of the most influential, I think it is the most influential music genre that's out there now. But look at how corrupt it is. There are literally people that straight up will tell you, I don't even, like, I seen this one thing on Instagram, this post from this guy, he's a rapper called Lil Tecca, and it's like this one with the yellow background, and they dissect their songs, right? And they start, like, they say the couple bars.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And this guy is like, I don't even drive. I don't even have my license. And he's talking about riding in Ferraris, and, like, then he's talking about girls. He's like, I got a girlfriend. Like, he's literally knows, like, he doesn't care anymore. He's willing to do corrupt music that's going to lead some people in the wrong path, and has no problem admitting it even at this point. Whereas before, you at least had to uphold the image of whatever you were trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
It's become so big and so influential that it's turned so corrupt at this point, right?
Yeah, it's like anything that once it goes corporate, that's the challenge of it all. And so what we were talking about is often with politics and everything, once there is money involved, often, and lots of it, that's where corruption falls. And so the problem is always the same, is that how do you keep the integrity of what you used to have, in the sense of, like, you know, when it was small, and when it was even Christianity. Think about that. Like, originally it wasn't even called Christianity. It was people of the way. Like, they were little Christ, but it didn't become an organization. There's a saying, and I can't remember who said it, but originally Christianity was a fellowship. And when it was in
people's houses and stuff.
Just house churches in Israel. You know, that there was just, that's what it was. And then from there it moved to Rome. No, it moved to Greek, and then from it became a philosophy, and then it went to Rome. It became an institution. And then from Rome, it moved to North America, I guess Europe and all that stuff, and it became an organization. So the point is that it's
a business.
Well, because people then were Constantine, 300 AD, he sees Christianity.
Didn't he? Like, he signed something that made his whole army Christian or something. Well,
because he saw the opportunity. He realized that Christianity was a means to his own, and like he was using it for his own gain and purposes. And that's what happened. So the art form of hip hop or Christianity, any of these things, at its base, it's still whole. But then people use it for their own gain, because now it becomes a medium and a tool. It's like social media. Social media by design wasn't evil. None of these guys that designed it intentionally were going like.
You don't think so? I mean, you never know, but I think you're right. I think they were just wanting to start a business, start something that is going to make them successful, right? And then, Mark Zuckerberg ends up getting however many billion people are on Facebook now. But as people start signing up and then putting more information, it's like, oh, look at all this stuff that I have. And then it's like the devil's whispering in your ear, like, let's do something with that. Let's capitalize on people's information and their security and their whatever, their personal stuff. And then it turns into like, to now it went from a way to connect people, friends. It was actually, I think, for like colleges or something.
Yeah, that's how it started. Right? Yeah,
just to connect with other college people or something, right?
Yeah, social network. That's what it was.
Who knows if they actually had a plan to get to this point eventually? No. I don't think you could have imagined. I mean, maybe you could have, but like it's pretty deep now to where it's political bias now. Like you can't post certain things because they don't want you to. But there's so many people on there that actually affects the cognitive thinking of cities and countries, right? So it's become very corrupt and not free thinking at this point, right?
Yeah. And so the question is, and this is the thing, is that it's great to recognize the problems of our world, but how do we change them? And so I'm going to read this to you guys, and everyone else is listening here. So here's why we decided to call it the
Edge of the Inside.
Edge of the Inside. Prophets, by their very nature, cannot be at the center of any social structure. Rather, they are on the edge of the inside. They cannot be fully insiders, but they cannot throw rocks from the outside either. They must be educated inside the system, knowing and living the rules before they can critique what is a non-essential or not so important. Jesus did this masterfully. See Matthew 5:17-48. This is what Martin Luther King Jr. taught the United States, what Gandhi taught British-occupied India, and what Nelson Mandela taught South Africa. Only with great respect for and understanding of the rules can a prophet know how to properly break those very same rules for the sake of a greater purpose and value. A prophet critiques a system by quoting its own documents, constitutions, heroes, and scriptures against its present practice. This is their secret. Systems are best unlocked from the inside.
And is that something that you wrote?
No, this is him. This is
okay, that's the rest of like his thing.
Yeah, his thing. So this is what inspired it. Right. I think we all have moments of inspiration, and for me, I was listening to this interview with, at the time, he was on this comedian show, a podcast.
It's not Joe Rogan.
No, it was Joe Rogan. It was some other. And he said that, and it just stuck with me, and it's always stayed with me. And then when we were thinking about it, I was like, you know what? Inside Out's great, but it's got to be more, especially when everybody had that name.
Well, that was the thing, right? So like Googling it and like, iTunes and all that kind of stuff, there's like Inside Out like a million times around.
Exactly. Right? So what we wanted to is that I think, and I always felt this, is that I wanted this this podcast to be about issues that matter, that we're fearless in the sense that we're willing to talk about these things. Because if we can't talk about these things, I always believe the things you cannot talk about control you.
Yeah.
And so once we are able to have conversation, that's why it's long form.
Yeah.
We can disagree and we can work towards really true transformation and change. I worked at the jazz festival for many years and got to meet lots of amazing jazz artists. And one of the things I learned was when I looked at these jazz artists, it looked like they start on a melody, somewhere over the rainbow. Okay. And then all of a sudden the melody disappears and I don't recognize the song. And I'm like, what the heck's going on?
And they just start like playing the instruments.
And they just go off. So they would literally start paraphrasing and they would go off.
But things that they've heard before.
Yeah. And then they would come back to the melody, like they bring it back again.
Oh, I see.
And so you're sitting there going,
I don't know jazz, obviously.
How are they able to figure out how to get back to, to wherever that reference point? So then they explain this to me, which I was like, what? So in jazz, you could be playing a song and then this guy gets on there and he starts playing off and you're like, man, like how did they well, first of all, most of them they understand music. Right. They understand music. They understand how music works. Most of them can read music.
So they know how to break
so what they have is this, and I learned this, is that they have cheat sheets.
Yeah.
They kind of know what the songs are about. And then they can go off. So one of the things they say is you cannot break the rules. You're a video guy. You understand this.
Right.
You cannot break the rules unless you know the rules. Right. So for you, if you're doing certain edits, like jump edits or cuts and stuff like that, you're breaking a rule, because no one, at one point, no one thought of doing jump edits like that. It was just, but the person who came up with it was somebody who understood editing and then started improvising and paraphrasing. And so that's why abstract painting, if I don't know how to paint and I just put something on a wall,
right,
and then I go, look, it's art.
Right.
It's not art, it's crap. I don't even know what I'm doing.
So basically, like when I'm shooting videos, right, there's rules. So this is probably a good example. So there's something called the rule of thirds, right, which I think, a lot of people are familiar with. Let me see if I can do this the right way. So it's like, you put something either, actually it's kind of like where we're positioned right now. So like I'm on this, the third of the image, and same with Joe, he's on that third of the image. But when you're doing something creative, like you can break that rule, right? Now, sometimes you can work things in a spiral, so you could have your focal point be here, so long as there's things that will like spiral it into, I can't do this, spiral it into frame from this way, whatever, right? So it'll spiral it down, but your focal point ends up being somewhere down here or something. Now, that's knowing the rules, when you can break them like that. If you don't know the rules in the first place, and you try to not put things even just in the thirds to start with, it's gonna look like a mess. And because you're not understanding what the rules are and playing off of those, right? So now it's just a complete mess. It's like somebody that just holds their camera filming anything, right? And it just looks like junk, just looks like somebody picked up their phone and filmed it. But again, knowing those rules allows you to break the rules. So
exactly, because I can get lucky. You can get lucky in business, you can get lucky in so many things. And but the genius is being able to repeat.
Yeah.
And so,
that's good. Yeah.
So part of the challenge that we have as a culture right now is that we have to understand the rules. We can't just go around and trying to break it all down until you really have a deep understanding for the systems that exist.
Right.
Because if even in there's spiritual rules, there are money rules, there's rules for everything.
Yeah,
there's the game of life. Like you have to understand. Like if I was playing football, I have to understand, first of all, how football works before I come in there and try to break all the rules. People will be like, sorry, dude, but you can't do this. And so I think that's what I want this podcast to be. This is a podcast that, first of all, believing that change, or the secret is that systems are best unlocked from the inside. And we, even as humans, think about that, inside out. Yeah. The things that we want, the transformation, all happens from the inside out. Right. We're always looking on the outside, but the best way to really, and this is what Jesus understood. This is why Jesus didn't really care so much. It's not that he didn't care. Right. He saw the oppression. He saw the injustice that the people were suffering, but he knew that change happens from the inside out.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so 2 points to that. So there was the one about the football and knowing the rules and then being able to break the rules. So what I thought of was like a play that some football team, like when I played football when I was a kid, there was this play where, okay, so here's the rules. I forget his name, the hutter, the guy that huts the ball, right?
The quarterback.
No, that's the guy who gets the ball. I'm talking about the center, the guy that holds the ball at the beginning of the play.
The center. The guy who
literally is holding the ball and passes it back to the quarterback. Okay?
The center, yeah.
That's the way the rules are. The quarterback says hut, and he either passes it to him or he throws it to them. But knowing those rules, you can break them. So sometimes what a fun play is, the center will hut the ball, but he won't actually give it to the quarterback.
He'll hold it.
He'll hold it. And then the quarterback is pretending like he has the ball and he's running, and then phew, the center's gone, right? Now imagine, that's knowing the rules, okay? Imagine if you didn't know the rules, right? And he goes to hut the ball, and then everyone's wondering what the heck's going on. The quarterback doesn't get the ball. He's not doing anything with it, right? You need to know the rules in order to be able to bend them or break them. And I love it. And it's same with Jesus. So talking about how Jesus, he didn't care, like you said. So there was, the whole tax thing. When he said, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's, that is deep, I think, because just because somebody's face is on something doesn't mean they own it. But do you notice, regardless of what anybody thinks of that scripture, did he say yes or no? No, he didn't. He didn't just give you a straightforward answer. He gave you something to think about, but he was also wise with how he said it, because he knows everything belongs to God at the end of the day. Everything belongs to God. And then there's another scripture in there where they would go and they would preach at the synagogues and stuff like that. And then his disciples came to him and said, Jesus, they're asking us to pay the synagogue tax. What should we do? Because clearly what he said in the first place, it's tricky. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not something just, it says for those with ears, let him hear, right? Yeah. But he didn't care. So here's the thing. They're in that system and that's what they're involved in. He didn't care, even though you know what he said? He said, the sons of God are exempt from paying taxes, but go in the fish's mouth right there and there's a gold coin to give to them. Okay. So even though he knew in his heart that he didn't have to pay the tax, he still did when he was asked for it, right? Because he didn't care and he wasn't on the outside whipping stones from the outside. He was on the inside, working in the inside, still not a part of it in his heart, his soul, his mind, but still was very wise with how he executed what he was doing, right?
Yeah, he was on the edge of the inside.
Right. On the very edge.
Yeah. And that's the thing, to the point where they would even accuse him, saying like, this guy's a demon. And
right.
Because he understood their rules and their laws better than anybody.
Right.
He understood it. He could, he memorized the first 4 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. He knew it inside out. At 13, he was sitting there, debating with rabbis.
Right. Yeah.
So this is the thing. I think before you can ever have, and I say this to people often, you know what? Before you go out there and criticizing,
right.
It's easy to criticize.
Yeah.
It's easy to go around there, but to be constructive in your criticism, right. You have to first understand where the person is coming from.
Yeah.
And so part of the challenge for all of us in this culture is everybody has the ability now through social media to we all have opinions.
Yeah.
But often we don't have context for our opinions.
The opinions are formulated on emotion. They're not formulated on any wisdom or knowledge per se. And that's why, like, when I speak to people about the things that I believe in, or the way that I conduct myself, whether it's in person, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's towards the government, whatever, I've done so much research on this stuff. I don't just, if I don't know something, I don't act like I do, or I don't act out of emotion. Because even if people feel like the government's robbing them, but they don't know the information of how it even got into place or anything like that. Or driver's license. Well, guess what? I have my driver's license, but I still have actually a belief in understanding how that system works. I don't even think we legally need a driver's license to drive on these roads or license plate, because I've done so much research on it, like on how it was formulated and how it, like, it's been a while since I've referenced it, because I'm on the edge of the inside. I got my license. I'm like, whatever. Even though I don't believe that you need it, I still do certain things, because there's no point in throwing rocks from the outside and making my life havoc or hell if that's not something that I'm willing to go full force in and try to, completely rechange it. And even if I did, is that the way to do it? Do you know what I mean? So there's a matter of having that wisdom and knowledge and then executing on that rather than just emotion and things that bother you, right?
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge of life, is that I think, and this is why I, in some ways, like this whole show and everything to be about, in the sense it's the prophetic voice. But in the old days, the prophets, they job was to simply tell the people, like, they weren't trying to make friends. They weren't trying to be liked. They weren't trying to be. And sometimes they say some really harsh things to the people of Israel. And sometimes they say harsh things to other people. But the thing was, they weren't binary in their thing. They weren't always thinking like, this or that.
Right.
And I think a prophetic voice is always listening to what's happening in society and culture. Someone said it beautifully, in the sense that it's like listening to a symphony, in the sense that you're listening to all these different noises that are coming in, harmonizing them, and then putting it out there in a way that it's palatable for people to listen to and go, wow. And I think when you have transformational message, by its nature, people inherently know, even those that disagree with it, inherently know there's something about this message. And that's why guys like Kanye West, that people make fun of often, are prophetic voices, because they're visionaries. They see the world not as it is, but as it could be. And sometimes we look at those people and we think of them as being mad, crazy. But you know what? Historically, everyone that's ever been classified as mad, crazy, whatever. Not everyone, because that's hyperbole. Okay, sometimes I tend to exaggerate and I speak in these big, whatever. But the point is that most had something incredibly profound
to
offer, but that group of people wasn't ready to receive it,
right.
And so it's easier to just
to call them crazy.
Because when you call somebody crazy, it's easy,
right?
It's like, okay, you disqualify them completely.
Yeah.
But when you stop, I listened to the podcast for 3 hours
right.
with my wife last night, and there's stuff that Kanye is saying, you're like, what the heck? And you're trying to make sense of it, but you realize this is a guy who deeply cares
right.
about his calling and his purpose in
right.
life.
Yeah, I think if you don't understand it, it's because you haven't thought on the things. He has. He's worked it out, and he's thought. There was actually one thing that he mentioned, and what was it? I think I'm trying to remember what Joe Rogan asked him about, and I think it was to do with healthcare and what he would do with healthcare as the president. And he started explaining about these two different schools. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So he started explaining about these two different schools. And a lot of people might have got lost on that. But I actually understood the concept that he was trying to make, right? He was talking about these two principles. And one was a state-funded school that wasn't allowed to have Christian morals or something. And the other was a Christian school, but they were broke. And these two principles lived on the same street. And I think he introduced them to each other or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's his point was that there's people over here that have something that these people need, and these people over here have something that these people need. So why can't we just put them together and work together on things, right? But again, you would have to not have a preconceived notion of who you think Kanye West is, he's crazy or he's just rambling or he's just going off on a tangent. You have to, if that's there first, if you think he's crazy or just going off on a tangent, then you're just going to see that's all that you see. Whereas if you don't think he's crazy in the first place, then you really are able to put the pieces together and say, oh, okay, I see what he's saying there. Easily I see what he's saying there. But you can't just dismiss somebody because of, it's emotion. And it's also because I think a lot of people like Kanye push the boundaries. And I'm trying to think, does he push other people's way of thinking? Yeah, he pushes other people's way, makes other people uncomfortable because they're so ingrained in a way of living. It's again back to when my mom used to always tell me to get a job. Well, she's so ingrained in that way of living. And then also it's societal pressures to say my son's a failure or not, right? He has a good job and he's doing this. And so it's all these things in place. And then I'm telling her, no, I'm pushing her, saying no. And now she's thinking the way I'm thinking to some degree. You know what I mean? Which is crazy to think that. But I have so much time with my kids. I've been able to raise my kids and build relationships with my kids and really have a good foundation with my kids because I don't work that kind of job. You know what I'm saying? And so, and at that point, I'm actually making more money, thank God, than I would have been if I had just a regular, especially I have a criminal record. Talk about boundaries and stuff, you know what I mean? I couldn't get a job that you could get right now. I couldn't because I have a criminal record following me. Can you go to the States?
Yes.
I can't. You know what I mean? It's think about that, right?
Wow.
That goes beyond racial boundaries. That's not because I'm black or you're black or I'm white or anything like that. There's other things in place that are holding people back, probably a lot more than skin color. And I'm not saying that there's not people that are biased towards that. I think more or less they have evil in their heart. And if, you know what? You as a black person can actually change that person just by the way you conduct yourself. And you could crush the walls of any sort of racist belief that they had in their minds. If they have this belief that black people are a certain way and you show up every day and be the opposite of what he thinks, but not doing it because of what he thinks, but just being yourself and well, first of all, realizing yourself and empowering yourself and following what I would say the best way to live is following God's laws and having that kind of character where it says love your enemies and do good to those that want to harm you and all that kind of stuff. And you could crush a racist whole mentality, their whole life that they built up towards this thing. And then maybe you change that one person to look at every black person differently at that point. Right?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's so good, dude. That's so powerful. And I think that's the point that I'd love to end this podcast with really that sentiment in the sense that we all have the power, we have the capacity, but the challenge is always going to be this. Life is nuanced. And I'm learning this, is that it's never one thing. It's multiple things, and there's a complexity to it. And so sometimes we like to simplify it because social media works that way. Everybody wants that big headline and big meme and all that stuff because that's what works. Yeah. But life needs context. And my hope, even through this conversation, hopefully, is that people have been challenged, illuminated. You don't have to agree.
Right.
I don't agree with what some of the stuff that James thinks about.
Let's talk about it, Joe. No.
You're not gonna. That's gonna be 10 podcasts, But that's the beauty of it all, is that there is this beautiful, and I believe this is that life is held really beautiful in this place of tension, and tension is good, not for the sake of it's
Right.
there's this. It just keeps us illuminated, excited. Like, I was in this conversation because you were in this conversation.
Right.
And in those moments where there's tension, it's also where I have to start thinking and going, I never thought of it that way.
Right.
Like when you said something like in the context, we don't need licenses. I'm like,
right.
Do we? Like, that's a great question.
Right, so you never thought about it
I
before,
never
right?
thought about
well,
it.
guess who had to think about it? Because I lost my license when I got a DUI. And then I'm going through all these loops, 5-7 years later, when I'm getting my life on track and I'm not living how I used to. And I'm like, man, this is stress. The tension, it was stressing me out.
Yeah.
And so I just did tons and tons of research on it. Like, you don't even know how licenses were established. You don't know that it was only meant for business, right? So it's if you're on the road conducting business, if you're a taxi driver, for example, if you're a transport delivery truck driver, that's when you need to get a license, and you need to license and register your vehicle. But it's not for recreational traveling, right? Which we all have the right to. Who is to tell you that you can't drive somewhere? You know what I mean? Like, when we all know that there's a lot of people that shouldn't technically have their license in the first place, but they got it somehow. So where is, what's the, I don't know, I can't think of the word.
What's the line?
What's the line? What's the line that you cross that says, okay, so the license makes sense, right? It doesn't make sense because some of us were driving before we had a license. You know what I mean? Before we were even old enough to get it, and we drive better. Some of us drive better drunk than other people do sober. You know what I mean? So what's the point of a license is what I'm saying. Where does that...
Well, I think here's the thing.
Here's the question. What does a license do for you? What does it do for people to have to get a license?
Well, here's an example. Okay, so I remember, and this is just my younger days in Africa,
right,
when there was not many rules,
right,
the roads and whatever. And I remember this one road where there's a high casualty of people dying because people are just driving.
Mm-hmm.
And so rules generally come because we as a society can no longer police ourselves.
Okay.
And so often, even the whole concept of abolishing the police and all that stuff,
right,
in theory, it's great. In theory, who needs anything? But the reason why, and I always think of it in biblical sense, is that, when Cain killed Abel and there was bloodshed, it's like all of a sudden, there's these rules that are being established. And so most of the rules are established for our good.
Right.
But then this is what happens. The rules can also imprison us.
Right.
So often the government, that's what it is, rule upon rule, because something bad happens, and so they build a rule.
With a rule instead of fixing it with morality, really, at the end of the day.
Well, this is the thing, behavior modification. Like that, the reality is you can't really modify people's behaviors. What you can do is try to change the way they think and believe.
Right.
But that is a very difficult, challenging thing, because not everybody in the world is going to, sadly enough, enter into that type of...
Well, put it this way. So, here's the thing. Rules don't stop people from doing stuff.
No.
That's the thing.
But rules, somebody said it beautifully. They said, rules may not stop... you may not like rules. You may break the rules.
Right.
But it does protect me, because if I know, example, every day that I drive, there's a yellow line.
Yeah.
And most people know that yellow line means...
So, there's a context in that. So, here's the thing. I wouldn't consider that a rule, though. I would consider that just basic common sense. Now, the rule that comes into place is, here's the thing. So, drinking it, you know what? Let's go to Paul. Paul said, I can do all things, but not everything is beneficial. Right?
Mm-hmm,
so that means he doesn't do all things, even though he's permitted to do all things. So, those guidelines, those are guidelines. The lines that are on the road are guidelines. It says, common sense. The light's red, stop, because other people have to cross.
But people don't have common sense. People drink, people get intoxicated, people are busy, people are on their cell phones.
If people are going to drink and drive, they're going to do it regardless if there's a law or not.
Well, no. You educate them, though.
And it's the same thing. People are going to commit a crime. People still commit murders even though it's against the law. But
here's the question. In New York, they decided not to have the abortion, not abortion, abortion. What I'm talking about, they decided not to have, they reduced
like the strict laws or something.
They just reduced, I think, the amount of police officers
Yeah.
and stuff, and crime has gone sky high.
Right.
The point is that, here's the thing, okay? When you have a police officer or when you have rules, they're deterrents, okay? They don't necessarily mean that they are like that's because of the rule that there's not going to be any crime. But they deter because you can compare it to places where there is no rule of law. Guess what happens? No one's going to go in there because then you've got people running around, robbing each other, killing each other, stuff like that. So I wish, that we could live in a world where people can just go out there and not have rules and all that stuff. And unfortunately,
though, I'm not against rules. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not against. I don't believe in drinking and driving. Let me just say that, right? Like that's pretty obvious. And I think that there should be a certain age you need to be by the time you should be driving, right? But it's.
I understand what you're trying to get to on a philosophical level.
Yeah.
Like biblically, it says the strength of sin is the law. So what that means is like as soon as you put a law out there, you actually incite people to do wrong.
Okay.
So for example, if you didn't know like something was bad and I told you, hey, James, you know what? You see that apple right there? Don't eat it.
Right.
That was actually a law.
So what about this? So for example, for like sex out of wedlock.
Yeah.
Right. So, if people think that it's a Christian thinks that it's wrong because God told them, they might do it. Is that what you're saying in a sense? Or maybe I'm not wording that the correct way.
Well, I'm just saying is that the law, you're right. The law is not a great way to get people to behave the right way. The law is what you're doing is you're imposing. That's what it is. It imposes a restriction. So it literally says, you know what? We don't trust you because you've demonstrated historically. Here's the evidence.
Right.
So as governments, we want a civil society where we function. And so what we're going to do is we're going to enact certain laws that we all agree upon. We legislate these things and we pass them.
Right.
But you can't legislate morality. You can't necessarily, at the end of the day, it's true. You cannot stop somebody from murdering, from doing all those things.
There's certain things that, like I completely understand. So this all started because my question is, what's the point of needing a license to drive? Like, here's the thing. Yeah, I agree. Don't drink and drive. Stop at the red lights. Stay in your lines. Drive on the right side of the road. You know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. Have your baby in a car seat, a safe car seat. Sure. And it's all for logical reasons. I don't understand the logic behind a license.
Well, at the end of the day, the license is so many levels. It's always like that. So when governments get involved in anything, there is always going to be a couple of things. There's control. It's very important for governments to have some level of control.
Right.
And it generates income.
Yeah.
Governments love the idea of...
Well, that's the problem too with the government is the income problem, right? So almost everybody that I know, if they don't work for government, they don't get paid as much as the government does, right? So the system that's supposed to be serving us is really just funneling funds from us. Like everybody that works in government always talks about how they have it's a good paying job and all this stuff, right? But it's too much.
I know what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
You and I are on the same end.
Yeah.
Like I believe in a small government because I think governments by design are not great. Their intentions are great, but they're not great at innovating. They're not really great at distributing funds in a way that would allow people to actually, really have true impact. I think government should be focused on our roads. All the infrastructure, I think it's really important that governments be involved in those things. I think governments, to some extent, like from a healthcare standpoint, I think there needs to be some level of healthcare that's provided by the government, because if you're poor and you can't, like in the US, for example, their insurance system, I think insures about 160 million Americans. Okay. But then within that context, they also have Medicare, I think, or Med-Aid or whatever they call it.
Obamacare.
No, it's not Obamacare. Obamacare was...
Is that canceled or whatever?
Yeah, that got canceled by Trump.
Medicare,
but yeah, the point is that they do still have, they care for, but then there is also a segment of that population, if they have no insurance, they can't afford it, and there's people that go bankrupt because of that. And so I believe on that level, from a healthcare standpoint, as being Canadian especially, I believe that government is government great at also, though, when it comes to taking care of our health? No, because the reality is, even in Canada, we can't afford our healthcare system. Like, I sound like a politician right now, but the point is that we can't.
So it's interesting because this boils down to people. It boils down to the heart of people, because at the end of the day, and this is why Jesus always said, like, you know, like it's the heart of man that is evil and wicked, right? And the heart needs to be cleansed and the heart needs to be changed, because in reality, there's people right now that make a lot of money in this city alone. We personally know some millionaires, right? And there's people that are struggling here right now.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that the system is designed, it's so interesting, because like we could do all this stuff for everybody. Everybody could do things for everybody, right? Like we both do gifts of service to people, and we're both not super well off by any means compared to some people that we know for sure, right? And these people are doing good, but where is, so it's like, here, let me try to say this.
Mm-hmm.
The healthcare thing, for example, right? Like in the States, why? Oh, it goes back to this point of, this is what they're doing over here. Well, let's start something over here, right? Let's build a town or a city. I think that's what Kanye is planning on doing, actually, something like that. But let's build something over here where we all take care of each other. And I don't believe in like socialism. I think I believe in capitalism. I don't even know really what I believe in, but I believe in like the form of, you know, work your ass off. You get what you work for. You know what I mean? And it's long term. So anybody that wants a short term, you're out of the game already. That's why you probably rather be a socialist, because you're not in a long term struggle. You're not willing to hustle and bust your ass and for 5-10 years before you see anything proper, right? But so I believe in that. I believe you work for what you get. But I also believe in helping people.
Yeah.
Not because I'm told to, but because that's what's right to do, right? Because if I see somebody struggling, then I want to help them out. And so if I'm in a situation in the States where I got a couple million in the bank and people are struggling, well, let's help them out. Or you can't get healthcare, you can't go to the hospital, you can't get the things you need. Here you go. I have more than enough. But I think the problem is it's the moral character of a lot of people and their beliefs and their ideas and what they want and what they build their life around as well, right? So if you have too much stuff, but you have $1 million in the bank, well, you need to facilitate your too much stuff. So you are holding on to that million like it's all you have, like it's the $10 that the guy has who needs to get his kid diapers and get them dinner for the week. You know what I mean?
Straight up.
And so it has to start from people's hearts. That's where it needs to start. That's where the change needs to happen. Otherwise, nothing's going to be fixed because the systems that you're trying to revamp are going to become corrupt again. You want to get rid of the police. Like you said, there's a good point. People are going to start committing more crimes. So where's the line where we say, what's the actual fix? And the actual fix is inside of people.
That's it. We got to focus. Organizations are made of people.
Right.
Systems are made of people. And so what we need to do is, if we focus on people, and right now with COVID, that's one of the big challenges right now, is that as it slowed us down and things have come up that were covered, that were buried, and people are dealing with personal issues and everybody's trying to work through it. And so as a society right now, I think sometimes when you have a common enemy, in the sense, let's say the virus, we can all collectively come together, but it's also, this whole thing has divided us. Why is that? Because people have politicized even the pandemic. So right now, the problem, I think the challenge of our culture is not necessarily the people. I think most people, at the end of the day, if you really look at their heart of hearts, are actually really kind, generous people. But what we've done is we've allowed the narratives to bring us into fear. And when people are in that, fear or flight kind, fight or flight. Fight or flight kind of mindset, it's really difficult for them. So part of the thing is mindset shifting, in the sense of starting with this idea and the concept of wherever you might find yourself, that you have wealthy, that you have something to give. Right. And I think if
that's where it comes in with me, because I have God. And that's the root of me being able to give. And even when my bank account might be in the negative, I was still volunteering and still helping out and not asking for money at that point still. And I'm saying, like, my credit card is over max. I'm saying I'm in overdraft right now, minus 500, whatever the case is. But but I'm still volunteering my work to certain people because I know that God takes care of me. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and to give you hope in the future. And it's like, and again, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And so when I have my whole life based upon the one who created myself, the trees, the sun, there's a creator of everything. It's not just here by happenstance, whatever, right? Like cars didn't just appear. Somebody designed them. The sun didn't just appear. Somebody designed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I have my faith in him, then I can give freely and I can help other people because I am secure and I know that I'm taken care of. My kids have always been fed. My kids have always had a roof over their head, no matter how much I give to people, right? And so if we can all find a foundation and be rooted in that, then I think that we'll just be given all around. Kanye was talking about this. He was talking about not charging for things, and money is an invention he was talking about, right? And how we could just give each other stuff. It's so, that's why I like Kanye, and I don't think he's crazy because I'm just as crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so once you get on that level, and I'm telling you, you got to disconnect yourself from the identity of this world and find your identity in God and as his child. And if you're the child of God, like Jesus made that parable where he said, who goes to their father and asks for a fish and the father gives him a stone?
Yeah.
I know my Father in heaven is good to me. And so I know that when I follow his ways and when I do good to his other children, he's going to help me. It's the same way with my child, with my daughter, because my son is younger than her. And I don't know if there's like a difference in brain chemistry from women and men, right? And my son's a little crazier compared to my daughter. And sometimes he'll want something that she has or whatever the case may be, or he'll be fighting something and she'll give it to him. Well, guess what? I'm taking my daughter aside and I'm giving her something that I'm not giving him.
That's it.
To reward her for doing something good for somebody else. I'll give her a treat or whatever the case may be, but I'll say, come here, and I'll give it to her when he's not noticing because I don't want him to feel like he's not as special or whatever the case may be, but you get rewarded for doing good. And God is the exact same way. You do good for other people. You give them stuff. You help them out. You service them. God will give you things. And the more you give, the more God gives you to give out to his people, right?
Amazing, man.
But we got to end it on
I think we got to end it.
Roll.
Yeah, I got to roll too. Anyways, thank you guys for being part of this conversation. Hope to see you guys next week. And hopefully you have a clear understanding of how mad and crazy we are.
Peace.
Woo!
Hour and 40, man.
You said an hour. And
yeah. We could have kept going we're going to get those like 3-hour ones in soon.
We could have talked forever right now.
Yeah.
But it's good.
We're finding our groove too, I think, man.
Yeah, and I think it's good when you do it this way because it becomes...